Hi, I'm Fezzicent and welcome back. Today I have a pretty special video that a few people on YouTube have been asking for since I made a comment on DorkAxe's Left 4 Dead retrospective video. I'll be explaining how the AI director goes about populating the world of Left 4 Dead. I've personally studied and researched Left 4 Dead for a few years now, unsurprising to some, but I really like the game. Now, in this video, I'll note that I'm focusing on how the director in Left 4 Dead 1 spawns infected, not how it goes about spawning items. That's its own can of worms. Almost all of my information in this video is based on a presentation by Valve, to which I'll post a link in the description, also console variables and commands in Left 4 Dead, as well as my own personal experience. The purpose of this video, knowing what a data structure is, isn't exactly needed, but a simple definition is that it is a way to organize, store, and manage data in a computer program. The most important data structure in Left 4 Dead is its navigation mesh. A navigation mesh, or nav mesh, is a collection of polygons within a game map that represent all traversable areas within that map. AI in Left 4 Dead use this navigation mesh to find their way around it. The AI director heavily relies on the nav mesh too. The escape path is calculated when a map is first started for the first time. It's the most direct path from the start of the map to the end safe room. This is done based on the flow distance of each nav mesh area, which is its distance to the end of the map. This distance isn't calculated as an A to B sort of thing, it's calculated through pathfinding and the distance of that path. The active area set is an important data structure that the director uses to do various things. The active area set, or AAS for short, acts as a bubble around the survivors, keeping track of what areas of the nav mesh are within that bubble and which are not. It also tracks which areas have entered or just exited the AAS. This is important for spawning and despawning infected. Basically, if an infected finds itself outside of this set, they'll be despawned. This is why you may have heard a smoker randomly die off in the distance before. The AAS also tracks what areas in the set are potentially visible to the survivors, and which aren't. This is important so the director doesn't end up spawning infected right in front of the eyes of the survivors. The AAS tracks which parts of the set are currently ahead and behind the survivors, based on their flow distance. If the flow distance of an area is greater than the survivor's flow distance, then it is considered behind the survivors. If the flow distance of an area is lower than the survivor's flow distance, it is considered ahead. The AI director keeps track of a metric called emotional intensity for each survivor. This is often shortened to just stress level instead, and that's how I'll be referring to it. This metric is a value that ranges from 0 to 1, starting at 0. The stress level of a survivor is increased based on a variety of events and circumstances, such as when they're attacked by infected based on the damage taken, when they are incapacitated, or when nearby common infected die, based on their distance. So if a common infected is killed up close, the increase will be greater, but less when they're killed farther away. This is a good way of knowing when the survivor is being overwhelmed by a horde of infected, because if they're killing commons in close proximity in quick succession, that means the infected are getting to them. When a survivor is pinned by an infected, their stress level will instantly max out to 1. The stress level of a survivor also passively decays down to 0 over time. This decay is turned off when they're actively being attacked. Threat population is a term used to describe the different spawning patterns of the director. A full threat population means the director is in full swing, spawning wandering infected, hordes of infected, and special infected. Minimal threat population means the director is not actively spawning infected, but any infected that are already alive will remain so until despawned or killed by players. When a map starts or restarts, the AI director will first run through every area in the map and assign it a random wanderer count value. These values are based on the length of the map and the map's desired wanderer density. Most wanderers will spawn on the escape path mentioned previously, so there'll be a threat on the main path. When a map is first started, the The AI director will go through the escape path and place a boss spawn every n units along the escape route. Each time the map is started or restarted, these spawns move at a random amount plus or minus along the escape route to add some variation. Each start or restart, the director shuffles 3 boss cards, the tank, the witch, and nothing, and assigns them to each boss spawn. This is repeated for however many spawns are in the map. Usually maps in Left 4 Dead aren't that long, so they'll only have 3 anyway. Successive repeats on bosses aren't allowed in the shuffle, so if the last card of the shuffle was a tank, it won't put a tank at the next spawn after it. The AI director in Left 4 Dead has 4 main states: build up, sustain peak, peak fade, and relax. When the survivors leave the spawn, the director goes into build up. The build up state sets the threat population to full. Regardless of state, the director will set a timer for the next mob between 90 and 180 seconds. This timer will always be counting down, even past 0 until the mob is spawned. A mob is just a horde of common infected meant to present a challenge to the survivors. In the build-up state, the director will spawn infected. When an area enters the AAS, the wanderer count of that area is spawned accordingly, and then the wanderer count is set to 0. These are the infected that you see walking around, puking, leaning up against walls, or laying down. When an area leaves the AAS, the wanderers in that area are counted, despawned, and then the wanderer count is set to that amount. This is to keep a bit of continuity, so that if you leave an area without alerting the common infected there, and then come back, they'll still be there even if they were despawned. During the build-up state, the director decides how big the next mob will be. This value will increase if the survivors aren't stressed, and decrease if they are overstressed. If the mob timer decrements to 0 or below while in the build-up state, the director will spawn a horde of infected based on that amount. When a mob is spawned, the next mob timer is randomly chosen again. In the build-up state, the director will also spawn special infected. I'm not entirely sure how the director went about spawning special infected in Left 4 Dead 1, because the Valve presentation is really vague and the director debug mode doesn't reveal it like it does in Left 4 Dead 2, so I'm going to assume that it's just the same as Left 4 Dead 2 or similar. The director has 3 slots that the special infected can occupy. Each slot is emptied by default. Each special infected type is assigned a timer, and their timers are set between 30 to 45 seconds. When one of those timers goes down to 0, it will spawn the according special infected type in any available slot. Otherwise, it will wait until a slot is open. When the special infected occupying a slot is killed, the slot is emptied but also made unavailable for a few seconds. Each special infected type has their own preferred spawn location based on the AAS. The hunter prefers to spawn behind the survivors, the boomer prefers to spawn ahead or very close to the survivors, and the smoker prefers to spawn above the survivors. Once the average stress level of the survivors has crossed the peak threshold, the director will advance to the next state. Once a director detects that it needs to transition from the build-up state, it first enters a state called Sustained Peak. This state continues spawning infected for 3 to 5 seconds and maintains a full threat population before then transitioning to the Peak Fade state. This state is to always ensure a minimum build-up state duration. Once a director exits the Sustained Peak state, it will enter the Peak Fade state. In this state, the director is set to a minimum threat population. The director is no longer actively spawning new infected, but does not despawn already existing infected. During the peak fade state, the director monitors the average stress level of every player until it decays below the peak threshold. Once the players have calmed down out of the peak range, the director transitions to the relaxed state. The purpose of the peak phase state is to make sure any currently ongoing combat engagements can end naturally, rather than forcefully being drawn back, and this is to ensure combat doesn't eat time out of the relaxed state. In the relaxed state, the director maintains minimum threat population and therefore won't spawn any infected. This state lasts for 30 to 45 seconds, or until the survivors have moved far enough towards the safe room. This state gives the players time to recuperate, and maybe heal up, or anything else need to prepare to move on. This state is very important for giving players breaks so the game doesn't overbear them and potentially frustrate them. Like the pacing in a movie where you don't want to overstress the audience, the director's goal is the same. Once the players have had enough time or have started moving through the level again, the director resumes to the build-up state, and this cycle repeats. Often when talking about the roster of special infected in Left 4 Dead, the tank and witch get lumped in with the others, but internally these infected are not spawned in the same way that the special infected are spawned. These infected are referred to as bosses. Recall earlier when I discussed how the map starts or restarts, it places boss spawns along the escape path and randomly shifts them, then shuffles and assigns boss cards to each spawn. When players enter an area with a boss spawn, the boss will spawn regardless of the director's state, meaning that even when the director is in its relaxed state, the boss will spawn. This is because bosses are specifically meant to shake up the regular pacing of the game. They make things a bit more unpredictable and break the cycle. Of course, the tank and witch have very different ways of doing this. In the case of the witch, the players must slow down and coordinate to not alert the witch. A good team can successfully avoid her, while an ignorant or clumsy player might startle her, and an inconsiderate team will likely lose a member. Sometimes though, this gets thrown out the window if a player knows how to crown the witch, but that's not what Valve intended. The tank, on the other hand, is so much of a threat to the team because of its high health and high damage output that it immediately demands the attention of the entire team. A good team will coordinate to deal enough damage to kill the tank, while an uncoordinated team will probably be wiped by the tank. Panic events, or crescendo events, whichever you want to call them, are events in the game where survivors are challenged with something where they need to stop and prepare before alerting a large horde of zombies. This could be starting a lift to get up to a roof, or starting a parade float to create a bridge across someplace, etc. In these instances, the director is set to a minimum threat population to give players time to prepare before starting. Once the event has started, the director's controller is usually turned off, and a separate script is responsible for spawning large amounts of infected. Eventually, the event dies down, and the director's control resumes. The Boomer's Vomit is an interesting event that can fit under the Panic event title. When a boomer vomits on a player, it forces the director to spawn a horde. In most cases, these high-stress events will end at some point and trigger the director to go into the relaxed state. The director in Left 4 Dead is very simple to understand from a high level, but under the surface it's the combination of many systems all working together to almost perfectly maintain the game's pacing. I'm sorry I didn't cover the item spawning part of the director, but frankly I don't understand it nearly enough to discuss how it works. Anyway, this video took a long time to get out, but I hope you enjoyed, and I'll probably see you later.